I'd like to introduce Beth, our next speaker, my colleague. Beth worked as an AmeriCorps volunteer and with the City of Salem before graduating from OSU in 2003 with BS in Natural Resources. Since then, Beth has worked for the Oregon Department of Agriculture's Noxious Weed Control Program. Since 2009, she's worked as a waste production coordinator for Marion County. Beth's duties include coordinating, advertising, and promotions, and putting out the fabulous monthly newsletter that you'll be receiving soon.
Hello all, and I'm going to just put in a quick plug for my latest outreach effort, which has been a lot of fun, and actually happened today on KMUZ radio, community radio in Salem. It's 88.5 FM. We have a show every other Thursday from 1 to 1:30 p.m. called Waste Matters on the Air. And I interview different experts and innovators in our community who are doing great things to help reduce waste or teaching us about it. So today my guest was the illustrious Bailey Payne, who talked about why does waste matter. And next in 2 more weeks, it'll be Jessica Ramey and Carly Wright with DIY Studio, talking about creative reuse and also. So that's my extra little plug before we talk about composting. Pardon me?
What times will it be?
1 p.m., 1 to 1:30, every other Thursday. So today was a show day, so the 13th of March will be the next show.
And when they're available on the website, we'll send those links out to everybody.
Yeah, we'll
so
be
you can download them.
kind of archiving the shows both on KMUZ's website and our website once we get that all organized. And what else was I going to say about it? You can stream it online, which is actually the easier way to listen to it, because right now the tower for KMUZ is in Turner and it's not super strong, so it hits South Salem, Turner, Monmouth, Independence, Albany pretty well. Getting up into Kaiser and North Salem, it starts to get a little staticky. So you can stream it online at kmuz.org, or if you have a smartphone, you can get the TuneIn radio app and search for it and listen to it on your smartphone. But now on to composting. So this is Composting 101, which means this is the way anyone can get started learning about composting and composting. I'm not going to go into the most advanced methods, the way to tweak little things here and there at this point. This will just kind of help you understand that composting is something that anybody can do. It doesn't take a lot of work. You get to choose how much work you want to put into it. And then it will give you a kind of product back out depending on the level of work you put in. But you're going to get something in either way. So first, you probably have seen a few pie charts like this by now of what's in our garbage. Looking at the composition of what's still in our garbage, what's left after we've recovered things, there's still quite a bit of stuff. I better switch to the good hand for the pointer. All this stuff in red is all of the compostable stuff. Although, in the case of paper, we'd still want to recycle it as paper first. But if it's food waste contaminated paper or a paper that can't otherwise be recycled, then it would definitely be compost would be the next best option for it. So there's still quite a high percentage, number-wise here, that could be diverted at least through composting, if not through some other higher use. So composting happens. Decomposition happens, whether we try to do anything about it or not. So if you put a bunch of stuff out that is made of organic material, it's going to decompose without us even thinking about it. But composting specifically is harnessing that process that nature has already provided for our use, maybe speeding it up a little bit, making it a nice mix of nutrients. That's what composting is, when we actually kind of harness that process and use it for our own purposes. So it's more controlled than just regular decomposition. And it allows us to convert that organic material into humus, not hummus. You don't want to dip your chips in veggies. But hummus is that humus. I'm already getting myself tripped up with my jokes. It's the nice, rich, crumbly, earthy smelling stuff that you want to incorporate into soil, but it is not soil itself. It's pure organic matter. But it's down into the molecular form of pure organic matter. Well, it's often confused with soil, but it's distinct. Soil has mineral in it as well. So I think in a couple of slides, at least, I'll have a picture of the soil profile, and you'll see the dark, pure organic matter on top, pure mineral, rock, sand, something like that in the bottom layer. And somewhere in the middle is where soil happens, which is the mixture of those things. So compost is not soil because it doesn't have the mineral component that soil has in it. And humus is kind of like these tiny little clay-like particles, very, very tiny. And it's the properties of humus that create all the benefits that we get from compost. So these particles are so small, and if you know about the makeup of things, small things have larger surface areas when all combined. So if you took a circle and then cut it up into tinier circles and then measured the circumference of each one of your tiny circles, it would be much larger than the circumference of that original circle. You created more surface and more edge area. So humus does that, and those small particles with lots of surface area attract water and nutrients and the things that you're trying to get into the soil to benefit plants and a lot of other things. It can hold about 6 times its weight in water, and it can hold a number of other nutrients. Commercial fertilizers are primarily the big 3, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but there's still other micronutrients that are required for healthy plant growth, and compost has many of these depending on your compost recipe. So in order to get a diversity of nutrients in compost, you need to put a diversity of materials into it. But if you've got a pretty good mix, you're going to get a lot of those micronutrients that straight fertilizer mixes often miss out on. And that humus can kind of hold on to those nutrients until they're needed or pulled off by the plant. So they're this great storage mechanism for the nutrients until the plants need them. And they can release it more slowly, whereas pouring straight fertilizer on it, there's kind of no way for the plants to say, no, wait, I don't need that right now. Of course, there are time release formulas of things as well, but in general, compost is its own version of time release, or when the plant needs it. So here's the profile of soil, where you've got the O horizon, which is all the organic material, and then down here the C horizon is all mineral. And here you're going to have that richest mixture in the A horizon of organic material and mineral, which is pretty much the top soil area. So as all these organic materials decompose, they're getting lots of help. It just doesn't happen. It happens because there are microbes and bacteria and other things in there. And those things release some gummy substances that help bind pieces of soil together into aggregate. So you kind of get a little clump here, a little clump there. And that allows water to percolate through the soil profile. So it's the organic matter that is creating that gumminess that you need in soil to make it infiltrate well. But it also can hold on to water within the soil profile. It doesn't all just leak right through all those areas. It clings to the edges of them as well. So the aggregates, this gummy stuff, increases the size of those pore spaces. And then it can also help lighten up heavy clay soils that are kind of bound together as one packed unit. So when I was in soils class at OSU, my soils professor said, if you run across any question on an exam that you don't know the answer to, add organic matter. Because you're going to get partial credit, because organic matter solves or improves just about every negative soil condition that you might have. If it's too sandy, adding organic matter will add more water holding capacity to it. And if it's too clayey, it'll break it up and allow some pore spaces in that soil and add a few more nutrients to it as well. Although clays have a lot of nutrients in them, they're just so tightly bound, they need to be fluffed up and lightened with some other organic material to help release them. So here's just a couple of pictures comparing. This one has got some grass seed seeded into a compost amended clay soil, and this one's just seeded into the clay soil. That's the clay side. So you can just see a thriving. And this is relates to the erosion controlling properties of compost, which this is without compost. So there's a lot of rills forming in this area. And I think we've got some other erosion prevention stuff coming up here. So because of the improved water filtration, you don't have water hitting the ground, not being able to get in immediately, and then starting to run off the surface, which is where most erosion happens if it's not wind erosion. So adding compost will definitely prevent a lot of erosion from happening in the soils as well. It'll just allow that water to hit and then get soaked kind of right in like a quick sponge and then on in through the profile of the soil. And soil rich in nutrients produces lush plant growth. So what do plants have when they're growing lushly? What's happening below the ground? Well, what are they sending into the ground? Yeah, their roots. So roots prevent a lot of erosion, both water and wind erosion. So if you've got a nutrient-rich soil because you've added compost, you're going to get better growth, you're going to get better roots, and the soil is going to stay in place as well. So here's a couple of places where large quantities of compost are added to mitigation projects and construction projects to help. So they've built up these new berms. They want the soil to stay where they put it, so they're going to put compost and seed into that, encourage some good growth, and hopefully hold those new slopes in place. Another thing that people don't always think of is the ability of compost to help resist diseases in plants. There's been suppression of bacteria. So because compost is a living thing, it's full of living organisms, living bacteria, it's kind of crowding out the bad stuff. And also some of the side substances that the bacteria produce just are disease-resistant substances as well. So the suppression has been attributed to organisms such as fungal-feeding nematodes, protozoa, fungal-feeding bacteria. So those things are being produced in the compost, and they're kind of attacking the bad stuff that might want to come in and attack plants. And then that's happening especially in the soil profile, but they're also finding, some studies are showing that foliar-borne diseases are also being resisted from plantings that have had compost. So there's something that's happening systemically through the plants that they're able to benefit and fight off diseases on their leaves, especially if you can do a compost tea. Have any of you ever heard of compost tea, where you start out with a little bit of compost and you put it in water, in something like a tea bag, that you can then aerate and maybe warm just a little bit. So you're encouraging all the microbes in that little bundle of compost to reproduce. You're giving them the conditions that they like to reproduce, air and warm temperatures. And so pretty soon you get this soup that's very high in the microorganisms specifically. And you can spray that on plants directly, or you can water plants with it, and it'll provide those benefits as well. Bioremediation is when you use plants to suck out bad things from the soil. So if you've got contaminated soil, you can put compost on it. Often the microorganisms in the compost can directly break down petroleum byproducts and things like that in the soil. And then also growing up the plants out of it, the plant roots will extract it. And then you can take the plant material and burn it if it's high in some kind of a toxin that you really want to put back into compost again. But compost is used both to encourage the plant growth and directly to help decontaminate soils. So there are two types of composting. The kind that we generally encourage in people's backyards, we're hoping to go for active composting. And this is the faster way. This is where we're really trying to harness what we know about the way nature works to make things decompose more quickly and in a good balance so that we've got a nice product at the end. And so it's an aerobic process. You have to have air going on in it, especially to have it happen. And you need to make sure that the moisture level is just right as well. Because you want, just like in the compost tea example, you want the organisms in your compost to have a little layer of water to move around in. All of those microorganisms require wetness to move and to keep their organism structure intact. And then they need air to reproduce. The carbon to nitrogen ratio is of lesser importance than the first two. And we'll go more deeply into that ratio as well. Just a second. Passive composting is where you just kind of make the pile and you let it go. And that might be because you have so much stuff it's going to be too labor intensive. You're not ready to purchase equipment for turning large amounts of compost, so you just let it be a static pile and you let it go. And then you make another static pile and you work on building up a couple more and just let the first one sit there until it's done. And that will still compost faster than if you just toss stuff out and spread it out on the ground, because making a pile creates that warmth for the microorganisms, and the warmth increases their reproduction, which makes more warmth, which increases their reproduction. So you're actually causing a positive feedback loop that way. So even one that's not aerobic, it's going to get smellier. Aerobic piles don't smell as much. They don't create methane. But a static pile will still work. And it's also called passive or static are interchangeable. So we have two different kinds of organisms, though, working in each pile. So there are certain microorganisms that need the aerobic conditions. There are certain ones that thrive in the anaerobic conditions. Those anaerobic organisms are not, they're kind of detrimental to a lot of plants. And that's one of the ways that they're able to delineate wetlands, for sure, to say, okay, this is a wetland area. You know, we have certain regulations that apply in those areas. The way they determine where the edges are is what kind of plants are growing in it, because only certain plants will grow in those anaerobic conditions that are saturated with water. So if you're going to do a static pile, a passive pile that's basically composting anaerobically, you still want to, at the end, finish it off by fluffing it up and getting some air in it and letting it sit for maybe another week after it's been turned, just so that you don't have too many of those anaerobic byproducts, kind of like toxins to the plants, other plants. So anything that was once living can be composted, not necessarily in your backyard. But now I think the message is starting to get out there that even all sorts of different icky food waste that you wouldn't put in your backyard can still be composted. Stuff that you'd want to put in your backyard compost would be grass clippings and leaves and yard debris, fruit and vegetable food waste, non-recyclable paper. So if you had a lot of like really saturated crayon drawings, kids or grandkids, that could go in your compost pile and shredded up material that will help, keep the pile from getting too wet. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Herbivore animal manures, so rabbits, horses, guinea pigs, anything that eats a vegetable diet, you can compost its manure in your backyard. It's going to be pretty high in nitrogen, so that's still going to be important to balance it out. Woody debris, it doesn't matter if something doesn't decompose at the same rate as everything else. So if you've got a few twigs that you want to throw in, when you eventually finish your compost, you'll probably sift out a few of the big things and just toss them back in to continue on with the next batch of stuff that you start, but it'll decompose eventually. The bigger you get, the more space it might take, and your return on investment in your compost is not going to be great if you throw huge branches in there, because it'll just take them a really long time. And any other organics, weed, yard debris. So why are we doing it? We want to increase our recovery from that pie chart. We want to get more of that stuff out. It's more energy efficient to compost material than it is to dispose of it through the garbage system, our waste-to-energy facility and ash and all of that. Greenhouse gas, it prevents the greenhouse gas emissions that would come from it going to a regular landfill. Because in a regular landfill, it's going to be capped off, the conditions are going to be anaerobic, and the food waste and other organics are just going to create methane, which in more advanced regular landfills is being siphoned off for energy and burned for energy, but it's not as efficient as using the embodied energy and turning it into humus and growing more plants out of it and all of that. Plant nutrients, water retention, soil structure, bioremediation, those are all the things that we just covered about. These are the whys. And this is how to do it in a nutshell. These are the 4 components that you need: air, water, food, and shelter to make a compost pile, to harness that process of decomposition and make it work for you. And this is for an aerobic pile, which is what you want to have in your backyard. So giving it oxygen means turning the compost pile to add oxygen in about 4 to 7 days. So after you've compiled your materials, which we'll talk about the food part of it here, you're going to make sure it gets some air about once a week. Now, turning it does not mean you have to pitchfork or spade up and over every little inch of your compost pile. Turning it might just mean plunging that pitchfork or spade down into it, rotating it up and down, plunging it, rotating it up and down, just getting air down into as much of the edges and middle of the pile as you can. So it's a lot less labor intensive than a lot of people think. Especially you're just doing it once a week. And they make nifty little things called wing diggers too. That's just a pole with a handle, and at the end it looks like a propeller, except the propeller folds flat against the pole when you push it down, and then when you pull it back up, it opens up, and then it just fluffs up your compost. So it's really easy to plunge it down all the way through your pile. Not so easy when it's a brand new pile and you've got viney things that still haven't decomposed. But a pile that's been going a couple of weeks, those wing diggers, I switch over from my spade to my wing digger about that time and add the air that way. And then water. A pile can have too much water and go anaerobic, or it can have too little water. Guess what happens this time of year to compost piles?
Too much.
Yes. This is the too much. So you want to keep the moisture level, the consistency of a wrung out sponge, but you don't want to drown it. So you should be able to pick it up and squeeze it without drips of water coming out of your compost, but it should feel moist in your hand. That's another great gauge. So in the winter, it's important to have a cover, a tarp. If you just have an open pile, make sure it's tarped. If you want to keep continuing composting aerobically and you want it to go faster. If you don't want to put that work into it, just let the rains fall and let it dry out again in the summer, and it'll surely speed up again in the summer. In the summer, you'd want to keep it covered to keep the moisture in, so hot summer suns don't evaporate it all out. If you don't have a cover, you're just going to want to run the hose on it a few more times. So my usual process with my composter, and I use one of the Earth Machine black plastic ones, I once a week do my plunge the spade or my wing digger in, and then I just run the hose over it for about a minute in the summer when evaporation is happening. I don't put any water into it at all in the winter because the materials that I'm adding to the pile have a lot of moisture, and that's usually already enough in the winter. And then make sure it's got its lid on it. So food, what are you going to put in the pile? What are you going to try to compost? What are you going to try to turn into humus? We kind of already went through in your backyard. We've got all sorts of different kinds of food stuff that can go in there. Apple cores, carrots, banana peels. It's all fruit and vegetable scraps. Here is no in your backyard composter. And why do you think these things wouldn't go in? If they will decompose. What could be a problem with this side? Smell and raccoons. Yeah. You might not be the best of neighbors if you're attracting stuff like that. Now, in moderation, any of these could be okay. If you've got a fairly well-developed pile that's fairly warm and you stick a little bit of old meat in there, maybe just the scrapings from one plate, it'll go away. And it's not going to attract a lot of animals if it's buried in there, because it will decompose. But in general, you're going to stick to this stuff and be a good neighbor. So we're trying to balance out two types of material in a compost pile. Brown materials, which are high in carbon, and they're dead stuff. Many of them were things that were nitrogen-rich materials at one point, but nitrogen leaches out of materials pretty quickly. So when your grass clippings turn from fresh, green, and lush to brown, dry, and crumbly, they've gone from a nitrogen-rich material to a carbon-rich material. So dry leaves, straw, corn stalks, wood chips, sawdust, or shredded paper. And nowadays, my shredded paper seems to just be plenty of extra material in the winter, especially. I try to save leaves, but I use my leaves for mulching my garden. And then if I have any left over, I stockpile them to add to my composter over the winter as I add my food waste to it.
I have a question about leaves.
Yeah.
That there are some leaves that are not good for composting.
Yes, especially like oak leaves they compost much more slowly and they have a lot of tannins in them. They would be, any of those leaves that are not in the perfect category are still okay mixed in moderation. So they're the kind that you'd want to just feed in a little bit at a time, but not fill half your composter with or start a whole pile with to begin with. And I don't know the list of all of them, but I think walnut leaves have some growth suppression properties. In fact, I saw somebody who dumped a big bunch of walnut leaves on top of a blackberry pile, and it just collapsed the pile down. Probably not permanently. Blackberries are too hardy. They would grow back through it, but it definitely suppressed their growth. And I was kind of impressed, and it was not an intentional thing. I was at a farm helping them develop a farm plan to encourage wildlife coming, and I was walking around going, how do those blackberries? And then I realized they had these walnut trees and could just put piles of their walnut leaves there to get them out of the way. So walnut leaves would be another one of those that you probably wouldn't want to construct a pile with lots and lots of.
I can vouch for that.
So you can vouch for that?
I have 19 walnut trees on my property, and I thought it'd be great for composting, and it wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. But sawdust, shredded paper, those are always good winter time. If you can tap into someone who does some woodworking, gets sawdust, having a bucket or two of that handy to balance out your pile of brown is good. So the green stuff is higher in nitrogen, and by higher, that's a relative term I'm using, and I'll go into that more. But they're anything that's fresh and lush. So all of the fruits and vegetable scraps that are coming out of your kitchen all winter long, those are all the nitrogen-rich things. Manures are nitrogen-rich. Coffee grounds, even though they're brown, they're really high in nitrogen. Tea bags with the tea leaves in them, if they haven't dried out for a while, are going to be nitrogen-rich stuff too. And this is really the powerhouse nutrient of a compost pile, is the nitrogen you can get into it. It's one of those main ones that you're going to get in fertilizer blends. So now we're going to talk about that ratio. So everything has more carbon than nitrogen, even if it's a nitrogen-rich material. You can see the different ratio of carbon to nitrogen of a number of different things. We've got, ranging from 25 to 1. I think there might be something. Alfalfa, I think that's the one that's got this is the highest nitrogen ratio material in this list, is 12 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So it's still got more carbon. But then you get these dry brown stuff like cardboard, shredded cardboard. It's 350 parts of carbon to 1 part of nitrogen. It's minuscule. So the ratio that's ideal for a compost pile that makes those the microbes and microorganisms in the pile happiest, they thrive the best when the ratio is about 30 to 1. So if you look on this list, some things that are kind of close to 30 to 1, well, then we've got peanut shells. We've got, where's the grass? The garden waste, grass clippings, 20, 30. So a lot of the things that you are likely to put into your compost pile when they're fresh are going to be very close to the ideal ratio just by themselves. So adding the brown material isn't so important for boosting your carbon. There's plenty of carbon in the system. But brown stuff is really absorbent and it helps you balance the moisture. And that's its biggest role for brown stuff, is to help you absorb too much moisture. All the decomposing banana peels and cantaloupe rinds and all those things are really high in moisture. So adding the brown stuff like shredded paper is going to serve more to absorb it rather than increase your carbon, because increasing carbon is not really as much of an issue. Everything has more carbon inherently. So if you can get a lot of good high nitrogen stuff in there and then balance it out with brown stuff to absorb it, you're going to get more nutrient-rich pile. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. And pretty simple, because you don't have to worry, you don't have to think ratios when you're building your pile. If you're getting a lot of fresh stuff in there interspersed with brown stuff to absorb the moisture, you're building a good pile. That's all there is to it. So out of this complexity comes the simplicity, right?
And fir needles are not advised.
Yeah, they're pretty high. They're pretty acidic as well. And again, not advised as a bulk, large component of your pile, but okay to incorporate in small amounts. But who has small amounts of them? They're better off underneath the tree and growing things underneath the tree that are used to growing in forest soils that have a lot of fir or pine needles. So here's kind of an example of how you could, if you balance out leaves and grass clippings, you're going to come up with approximately that ratio just with those two materials on their own. And then temperature is important. It's not necessary to go buy a thermometer, but it's interesting to buy one. And if you're really trying to micromanage your compost down to the most optimum time, then doing a little research on what temperature your pile is and if you should start turning it again after it reaches a certain temperature, those things are good to know. But you can get a pretty good guess that your pile is doing well if it just feels warm when you plunge your hand into the middle of it. It might not be getting up to 120 degrees. That's a pretty toasty pile. And I'm guessing this was probably taken at a commercial composting facility and not someone's backyard composter, or at least their earth machine. But you should probably get temperatures going up into 70, 80, maybe even 90, if your pile is really hot and cooking and doing a good job aerobically. And so it'll steam in the winter a little bit when you turn it, and you'll just kind of smell that earthy smell coming off of it, kind of waving up on the waves of heat. So 115 to 160 is the optimum range. Again, 160 is a very, very hot pile. Okay, so now you just need something to hold your pile, and you have a lot of options. People will sell you anything to get your compost going. And they all have their benefits. Many of them are for ease of turning. You have turning ones, rolling ones, ones that harness a little bit more solar energy and help the system get warmer. But they're all taking all of those basic components of composting and just trying to tweak them a little bit, maybe make them go a little faster, make them a little easier.
So is it best for them to be in the sun?
Yes. Yeah. But watching the moisture level. Mm-hmm. But yes, a composter in the sun, winter or summer, will just get warmer. Microbes will be more active, which means compost will happen faster.
That is funny. That drum that's sitting right there with that orange IFF on it,
Uh-huh.
the company I work for.
Oh, really?
Sold 8 years ago, and now it's a company I still work for.
Oh, that is funny. So here's the ingenuity of just taking a nice container that needed reusing, and they just kind of made this upside down dolly looking thing so that the rollers were on the upside so that they could just push the pile. Now, a caveat about these turning style ones, unless you get a lot of good air holes in them, they tend to get really moist. And that nice fluffy stuff that you started turning the first couple of weeks turns into kind of big lumpy clayey stuff that just goes, so you got to really get that brown stuff in there to keep these easier to manage and turn. And here's
about how much rain rides in.
yeah. just some different ideas and examples. Now, let me see if I can go back up here. This one's an interesting way. This is just kind of intercropping in a garden. So you've got rows, maybe mounds of raised beds, but in between them you've got troughs that you can just fill with your material, put some soil back over the top of it, and just let it compost in place, in which case that'll be right down at the root zone for those plants that are on the outside to start pulling from. So that's an easy way to do it if you've got a good sized garden. And we've got a worm bin here. You guys already know all about that. It's a nice thing about following sun.
Yeah, what about the hole?
That's just another way. It's pretty kind of similar to this, that you can just compost in a hole. You want to be really careful that you're not putting stuff in there that you wouldn't want in your backyard, attracting critters, that you're covering it with layers of stuff if you're putting food waste in them. But it's pretty much it's the same thing as doing the trench. And this one is a hole that just has had a garbage can made with holes in it, kind of sunk down into it. So that way, again, the compost is kind of already starting to be able to enter the soil profile at the bottom of it. And here's hay bales using to contain a pile, cinder blocks, one constructed a little more fancily with some wood and corrugated tin, pallets being reused. Anything that can hold it, about 3 cubic, or about a cubic yard is a good optimum beginner pile size to get the microbe activity really working and the pile getting warm enough. Much smaller than that. I did have someone calling saying that they were really proud of themselves for reusing an old dog crate as a composter, which I thought was really cool because she could just kind of set it up on end, she could open the top of it, do stuff to it. Then she called back a while later saying, it's just really not going, and I found out it was actually kind of like one of these. When I asked her to give me the dimensions, it was like, well, it's about 1.5 feet wide. Like, you need a little bit thicker dog crate to really get it moving. I mean, it'll still happen. It's just not going to happen as fast.
So when you have one of those bigger ones, because that's kind of what we have.
This like cinder block
Yeah,
style?
I mean, it's actually almost twice that size. It's just, I don't know if it's almost be better for us to do 2 separate ones. I just
Is
find
it cumbersome?
Yes, I mean, it's
Yeah.
you can't really feel like you're ever getting down to the bottom.
Yeah.
So I mean, like once a year, my husband in the spring will kind of clean everything
Right,
out.
and if you're getting them very large, like what you're describing, you're just going to start thinking more about static pile stuff, where you're going to have one like that, and then maybe you can do another one like that and just let that one go and not worry too much about a lot of turning. You could probably still, or you could lay perforated pipe through it and just let air naturally seep in. And you'll see some examples of that in the commercial composting slides that I have coming up, just to give you some ideas. You could either put them in vertically or horizontally through the pile. And earth tubs are a fantastic compact way to do all food waste. Has anyone ever been to Brighton Bush Hot Springs? They compost all of their food waste with earth tubs there. And it's just a big tub that has kind of an auger in it that you rotate the lid and it pushes the auger around and stirs it. So you just have to stand there and walk around it 1 full time or 2 full times or something once a week or so. And then it in vessel, so you don't have you can do a lot more other kinds of waste than you would in your regular backyard composter because it's containerized, so it's not going to allow the animals and things to get into it. And you do add a lot of sawdust or other kind of shredded paper or bulky material to it regularly also. But these are being used really successfully by some of the correctional facilities now. We helped a couple of them get started with grants before our grant program went away, but they're working really, really well for them. Was there?
So it's not a lot. I mean, everything is just in the, I mean, like, typically somebody like myself, if I had a metal container at home, put a thing just to turn it around and do something like that on a smaller scale?
Yeah, you probably could, although I don't think it's going to go as fast because it's not this large. I think the size of these really helps in the speed of it. How does it get air in it? through that turning. So it's not a sealed airtight system. So when they're turning it, it's mixing. There's kind of a pocket of air above the top of it, and so that air is just getting mixed in through as they're turning it with the lid. And I don't have any great pictures on this slide that has one open where I can explain that a little more, but you can go search Earth Tub if you want to find out a little bit more and see some other pictures of it in action. And there's an electric component to it, but it doesn't. It's just like a little auger. I don't know if that's what helps get it out, but the main bulk of the turning of it is manual. You usually have two people across from each other, like they're shown there. Do it. So for backyard composting supplies, we help market them at no profit at Fresh Start Market. The Fresh Start Market actually adds a little bit for their programs to help support their juvenile programs. So this $34 composter is actually $29 that's our cost, and then the Fresh Start Market gets $5 from it. So they're on super deep clearance. We have lots of them. We've had 2 not fully successful composter sales, truckload sales, where if you've been in Marion County for a while and you've seen us advertise the sale that happened in Woodburn and Staten and Silverton and simultaneously on the same day. So whenever we had those, if we didn't sell out of the composters, then Marion County had to buy the rest of the composters. That was the deal with the manufacturer and how we set up the sale. So we've had 2 of them that didn't sell out completely by quite a lot. And so we decided last year, okay, we're not having another truckload sale. We just sold these at $32 on one special day. And then we lowered the price permanently to $34, just so tell all your friends. Great low cost. It is about this tall and about this big around.
It's only $34?
Yes. Yes. It's only $34. Yes. And
$30 for one that's like
the pail, just the collection pail.
Little apartment,
Yeah. Yes. So this is the good size for the backyard, and it's got a door. I'll be good, Anna. Sliding door feature allows you to pull out some finished material while the stuff on top. Because even when you've got one of these, even if you're turning pretty diligently, you're always going to have more decomposed stuff at the bottom than you are at the top. So you can pull some finished compost out of the bottom of it. And then there are collector pails for sale there. This is the wing digger I was talking about. This is what it looks like. Little loose propeller thing that kind of folds up as you push down and then opens up as you pull up. Yeah. And we have a few of these there. I'd like to get rid of these too, but they're pretty much just what Sally did, although I think Sally's is probably just a little bit better than what we have here. Because the problem with these is that these little apple things are the only places that there are holes in these. And so I'm slowly, giving them away to schools and things, and then I'm going to try to stock some of the nice stackable systems there. These were, one of my predecessors got the bulk of these because they were a more inexpensive one. They just seemed like a better offering for not too much, but it was kind of a you got what you paid for kind of thing. So you can if someone drilled more holes in these, they would be much better than they are. So that's my plug versus the plug for the Earth Machine. Fabulous. That's okay. And then these are collector pails, filter lid, non-filter lid. Those are kind of nice because if you're in Salem, Kaiser, and you can put all of your food waste in, they kind of plate width, so you can just kind of tip your plate in and scrape the plate scrapings right into that one. But some people like having a carbon filter as part of it too. So. Okay, speaking of this collection, we've got curbside collections. If you don't want to handle it in your backyard and you live in the city or in an urban growth boundary of the city, you're going to have access to yard debris collection or mixed organics. And so this is going to go to a municipal facility where it's all going to be dumped into a pile. Track hoe is going to remove contaminants and then pass the material forward, where it's going to be ground up to reduce the particle size and increase surface area. And then it's going to be thoroughly mixed together. So you might have some piles that have a lot more branches and other ones that have more leaves. And so at the facility, they're kind of mixing the perfect recipe for a good big pile of compost. So they're paying close attention to what's going in. And then it goes into windrows. Some of them are covered like this, in which case there's going to be some sort of aeration system happening inside of it. Some of them are going to be open and then turned with a windrow turner, so somebody gets to ride on that and straddle the pile, and it just turns it. This is called a continuous flow reactor, and fresh material is put in at one end, and it's slowly kind of turned and moving through the system at some slow but even rate, that at the other end of it, finished compost is kind of slowly but continuously coming out the other side. There are worm bin, large-scale worm suppliers and composters that have these types as well. And so this is a forced air windrow, so they've got perforated pipe that they're blowing air into, forcibly pushing it in, so it's going into the middle of the pile, and then the air is seeping out through the tops and edges of the pile. This is one where they're preparing a surface where they're already laying aeration pipes. So all of these pipes are connected into another blower system that could be blowing air through the system. And a big compost area can kind of create its own fog and all of that nice steam happening from the microbes doing their thing and getting warm. So the throughput, or how long it takes to start the material to go to the end of the material, 60 to 90 days is pretty common. It's going to be at the higher end for places that take all food scraps versus just yard debris type of material. But that's what the power of such large volumes can do. They get really hot and they go through faster.
So
but
what happens to all of that?
all the compost, it gets sold. We mean,
That's so good.
yeah. We have a lot of nurseries, vineyards, places that they buy it in the bulk and keep moving it through. Now that throughput is an important thought to hold on to as we move through here a little bit. So here's some static piles. So here's an example of that I was talking about with the static pile. You can lay down a perforated pipe and just allow the pipe. I don't think this one is connected to a blower system of any kind. I think it's perforated all around the edges of the pipe, and then so that air can come move through the ends and move into the pile a little bit. Yeah. And then this is just a regular static pile with no. So this is kind of a little more aerobic static pile. This one is probably more anaerobic. And I think that one is at Wildlife Safari. I think someone told me that. That's where that picture came from. So it's animal manure and straw bedding composting.
And we're going to go to PRC on Saturday.
Yes, and we're coming. I'm going to have some more PRC stuff coming here. And this is a place I haven't been yet. Bailey just gave me this slide because he had been down there. But this is a biomethane plant where it's digesting the organics. So it's putting it into an anaerobic system on purpose to create the methane from it in a specific vessel. And then it's creating the methane that, or other, it might even be other besides methane, but biogases that then they burn in an engine that generates electricity. So it generates about the same as our waste energy facility, but this is specifically happening from organics only. So that's another use for it. Contamination is an issue because we've got all of these great agricultural uses for compost, but nobody's going to be happy with it if they're finding syringes in it or other plastics in it. So it's really important to, when you're out there educating, to let people know that you got to be careful. We don't want pet waste in there. There are people, other humans, that are handling this stuff as it goes through the process, and pet waste belongs in the garbage.
Do the commercial companies that sell compost, do they put on the bags what the worth is of the soil? How can you tell if it's contaminated?
It's going to be a visual thing. You'll see bits of plastic in the compost.
What if there would be other contaminants?
If there was pet waste, let's say, it's going to be a contaminant up at the front end of the process when you've got workers dealing with it, but the composting process itself is going to break that stuff down. So any finished compost that you got wouldn't likely have an issue with hazardous microbes or something still being in the compost. because it gets so hot. Those kinds of microbes can't survive in 145, 160 degree commercial composting temperatures. And that's where all of your stuff that's getting picked up curbside is going. Now, if you're putting pet waste in your backyard composter and then spreading that around, you could be spreading pathogens around as well. And that's why DEQ really strictly regulates what temperatures those piles should be getting to as part of the regulation of compost facilities. And that's one of the reasons, because you can't micromanage down to that degree whether someone put their dog poop in their cart. Even if you've educated, it doesn't always stick, or it's people don't always hear it. So I want to talk about biodegradable and compostable plastics. There's a difference. Biodegradable just means it's eventually going to degrade someday. In order to be compostable, it has to degrade within that throughput window, that time that facilities actually take to degrade stuff. But the problem is that some facilities take longer than others, and that's why every facility pretty much needs to give its own list of what's okay to be compostable plastic-wise to go through their system. And there's really no benefit to the compost whatsoever to put a lot of plastics in. It doesn't improve the quality of the compost whatsoever. But if allowing these things in because it'll allow more capture of the food, it's the only way to get the food at a big event, for example, is to be able to capture it with the packaging included, and not, because you're not going to, at the Oregon State Fair, get everyone to scrape all the food off of their plate because they do the plate fair and up there. So it's a way to be able to capture more food and then deal with the plastic. But it has to be an organized thing, and that's something that Judy has done a lot, is gone and worked with events to let them know exactly what's okay, that will go through PRC at a reasonable amount of time. Because every facility is a little different, so they can't just take any kind of plastic. The other conundrum is, which of these four is a compostable plastic cup and which are not compostable plastic cups? Can you tell from here? Could you tell if it was in that pile and you were that guy who was supposed to get the contaminants out of the... So this is why these things are not allowed in your curbside cart. That's why they're allowed in specific loads that we know, okay, this came from the state fair. We know we approved all the plastics in the state fair, so we don't have to go through and hand look at everything. So this one and this one are compostable plastic. This one is just a recycled content, and so they made it look like it's all green and happy and compostable. And this one is just some pharmaceutical company's promotional cup at some party that they had, but nobody's going to be able to tell that from there. Same thing happens. This is not a compostable plastic bag. It's just a green plastic bag. But if you were this guy, you would not be able to tell one from the other. So that's why we don't really want plastic bags in our curbside collection either. Even if they're biodegradable and they biodegrade just fine in our system, they can't tell. This is a compostable plastic clamshell that Bailey put in his compost pile 2 years before that picture was taken. So this is where compostable plastics are not compostable in back. They weren't designed to be compostable in backyard stuff. And that one, I'm guessing, probably wouldn't even be compostable at PRC in the time they put through it. Okay, so we're going to go through food waste kind of quick here because it's about time for me to wrap it up and get some questions. We have a great person here, Griselda Puga, who helps handle all of our commercial composting and connect commercial composters with the services. She is working hard on schools. She also works with a lot of restaurants and households too, but that's kind of more my side of things. And in Salem and Kaiser, you can put it all in. You wouldn't want to put grease and oils in specifically, like large amounts of greasy things. Greasy foods are okay, but just the grease that you poured off of cooking your bacon should go in the garbage and not the compost. So things that you don't put in plastic bags, styrofoam, things that really, they're not compostable materials or safe to compost. And that's not where you put your little pail. This was one of the haulers that sent that in. That was just the biggest kick. And this was early on in the program where everyone got their free pail who asked for one in Salem and Kaiser. And then someone just put it at their curb, and the machinery really couldn't handle that. These are frequently asked questions. These are all on mcrecycles.net under the food waste composting page. So I'll let you go there if you want to go through those. And this is the Pacific Region Compost Facility. So they do, their windrows are laid out over permeable pipe, or perforated pipe. They then cover them with a tarp. And then instead of blowing air through the pipes into the pile, they suck air from the pipes, which pulls air this way, and then the air comes out through a big pit of wood chips that is called a biofilter to filter out the odors. So that's how they deal with the odors of the food waste, the compostable food waste. It's called a negative filtration system, where before what I was showing you, they're blowing air into it and letting the air escape out the top of the pile. This one, the system comes on maybe every 20 minutes or so and runs for 3 or 4 minutes, and the whole pile kind of like vacuum seals, shrink wraps, the whole tarp just goes against the pile for a while and then comes back out again. Okay, so the food that you're eating, microbes are taking care of it in there too. Whether it's going to a compostable toilet or going through a sewage treatment plant or a septic system, microbes are handling it in the end. And these are a couple of good, despite their artistic pretensions, sophistications, and many accomplishments, we owe our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. So it's that little bit right there. And to this earth I'll leave my bones, I want no markers, flags, or stones. So if I've done no good the wiser, at least I'll make good fertilizer. And then we all will. Compost will happen to us too, eventually, or at least decomposition will. If you want to get more into the advanced stages of composting and learning, the Soil and Water Conservation District and OSU Extension Master Gardeners, there's a Master Gardener Composting Specialist certification if you become a Master Gardener, and that's a really great resource to just get into every little nitty-gritty thing about composting. And this is one of our big displays for events. It's not just for hippies anymore. It's really hit the mainstream. It's gone big time. And this is no insult to hippies, you know. But they kind of got the reputation for starting it. And so this is me. That's my phone number.
Oh, I thought you were pointing to the hippie.
So are there any more questions before we wrap this up?
So I think perhaps, because our composting has a ton of worms in it, so it should, that's good, okay. Because I'm like,
Yes.
all those little red ones.
No, that's awesome.
Okay.
That's really, really awesome. So
I mean, we're not covering it to heat it, but if I did, that probably wouldn't be good for...
no, covering it won't be too hot for the worms.
Okay.
They'll still, because it's really the very center of the pile that gets hot, and worms can move to where they need to move, so you're not going to kill worms that way. But worms are adding even extra beneficial things that I'm sure Sally talked about, that going through the digestive system of a worm improves the compost even more. So,
I mean, I'm not adding them to them.
No, they come. They're there. What's interesting is that those worms, being a former invasive species kind of person, those worms are not native to the U.S. They're all out here. Yeah, they're not. There's most of the worms that we have out here, mass-wise, are not native, but they're everywhere. It's not like, you're not going to find them, but they're there. You put down a compost pile of any kind and they're going to come, because you've just given them their perfect habitat and food. Those red wiggler worms only thrive on organic matter only. They don't dig down into the soil profile at all. So that's why they come to your pile. They're usually just living among the leaf litter at the very top and in the wild. Any other questions?
Where can you get the little buckets?
The little buckets? We don't have free ones anymore. We gave away the stock of those. But Fresh Start Market has the one with the little filter lid, and then the tan one that's kind of oval. And the tan one is $10, and the other one is about $16 and change. So they're still really reasonable.
I bought a metal one with a filter for Meyer.
Yeah. And they have a pretty good price. So would they like 30?
No, it was like
25?
$19.95, 25, something like that.
That's good. All right. Well, that's all I have. Thank
So I have a
you.
question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
How many of you live in Salem, Kaiser, where you have mixed organics, and how many of you live outside of that?
Well, start with the first one. Salem Kaiser.
How many of you live in Salem, Kaiser, so you have mixed organics?
Or if you're in a house. You're not
Yeah.
going to have, yeah.
So, yeah, so the food waste, the meat and the dairy and actually the wax cardboard too, are basically only apply to you. If you live in Staten, Silverton, Woodburn, any of those other places where we have yard waste, that is really, if it grows, it goes. But none of no pizza boxes, no napkins, coffee filters are okay, but yeah.
Yeah,
I thought napkins were okay. We were told that I asked that at the last class.
technically, if you're not in the Salem Kaiser, it should only be yard waste.
Okay.
Realistically, the system's going to be able to handle your
You said milk cartons? You said
No. I said
Pizza box.
pizza boxes.
Oh, I think you said something about cartons.
Well, pizza cartons, the cardboard pizza boxes, not the frozen ones. Yeah, yeah. Even though a lot of this, like, I live in Silverton, and my stuff is picked up by Republic Services, which is PRC, so it's going to the PRC, but they separate out, they compost what's coming from Silverton separately from what's coming from Salem and Kaiser, because they are able, certified organic growers are not allowed to use the compost that is coming through the food waste stuff, because it tends to have a potential for being more contaminated with plastic byproducts because of the food part of it. So PRC will get a higher rate on the compost made that doesn't include mixed organics right now. I think as we're kind of all learning how the system works and everything. So that's why even though it's going to the same place, it's not going to be composted in the same way if you live in those different communities. Yeah. Okay.